very difficult year for capital float. We weren't able to raise any money. And that, in many ways, actually defined the first unique culture of capital float. That is being the underdog. And as the underdog, we got excited to prove everyone wrong, prove VCs wrong, to prove friends and families who were naysayers, prove them wrong, and actually prove to the larger ecosystem that digital lending was possible within the country. From then on, we persevered, and today we lend about almost 300 crores a month. And what kept us going is that over the course of the last 4 years, we've actually developed this culture of being the underdog. So back then when we started, it was proving to VCs that there was a model in India. Later on, when there were several digital lending startups, even though we were larger than most of them, our ambition was to always make sure we were sort of more nimble and actually were more innovative by putting the pressure on ourselves, saying that we were the underdog and they were leading us. And even today, as we scale, we always compare ourselves to the likes of the Bajaj and the Capital First of the world and say, hey, those guys are the guys to aspire to, and we are the underdogs. Being the underdog is something that gets the best out of us at Capital Float, and that's something that's extremely important to us and actually keeps us going day in and day out. The second really unique culture at Capital Float is something that most people would consider a disadvantage, but we managed to hopefully convert that into a unique culture that we have. And that is, since we are a fintech startup, we have folks who come from the technology space, so our engineers, our engineering managers, our CTO, our data and decision science folks, and even people who work at other startups. These are all young, creative people who come with very disruptive ideas and really move the company forward when it comes to innovative thinking and coming up with unique products. But at the same time, we have a whole bunch of bankers and lenders from traditional banks and NBFCs in the country who've seen lending, have done lending, and actually seen many cycles. And it is this fusion of these two cultures. So one is the people who actually are the techies who come to office in maybe t-shirt and shorts, and the others are the bankers who come in a suit. And this fusion is really what creates what we call a creative tension within the company. And rather than this being a distraction, we've taken it in our stride and make this something that we're actually very proud of. And we create and design our systems and culture to make sure that there is good bonding across these two types of people. And this actually rises all the way up to senior management as well as even the co-founders, where we really love and are proud of the creative tension across two types of people within the company. The third thing that we kind of did, which I think we did well early on, is creating a culture of asking for forgiveness rather than permission. And what I mean by that is we are all out for letting people take decisions, take risks, even if they fail, even if the decisions are wrong. So even if a person is taking 10 decisions and 3 of them are wrong, we'd still applaud them for taking a speedy decision. This not only ensures that there is trust within the organization, but what it also does is, because we are in the lending business, and so the decision of giving money to a particular borrower is extremely critical. And as such, that decision, to make that decision on time, is something that we pride ourselves on. And so that culture of being able to take decision percolates right through the last person within the organization. Apart from this, there were a bunch of few other small things that I think we did right in terms of building a good senior team early on. People say you shouldn't invest too much upfront in terms of people, but right from the start, we invested in a good senior team comprising of folks from veterans from the banking industry, but also technologists from companies such as Google, Amazon, and Facebook. We create a good work-life balance. So most people feel that startups, you should be working 15 to 20 hours a day. That's not necessarily true. We like to make sure that all our people have a good work-life balance. And there are many other things that, like I said, you could probably read in a book of culture that is pretty important to do, that I think we've done some of. Those are some of the things that I think early on we did well. There were, however, a bunch of things that we also obviously didn't do well, right? And the first thing among that is what I would call integration across geographies. And so, given that we do have a model where you still need human beings to form part of the process, we have people, the company is about 600 people strong, and we have people across 20 cities in the country. I think something that we've never done well and hopefully are improving on as we speak is how do you get folks who are outside the corporate office, which is based in Bangalore, to really integrate into the culture of the company, to make them feel like they are part of the decisions, to make them feel that they are part of day-to-day involvement. And while we've done things like town halls and making sure our senior teams travel to all these cities, I think there's a little more that we could do in terms of making sure right from the get-go we integrate folks from all across the country. And this is very important in a young company because you don't want to reach a stage where you're 10 years old and you have a few thousand people and they don't feel part of the main company. The second thing is we did delay an implementation of a performance management system as well as a rigorous reporting and reporting cycle. As a startup, we always feel that we need to sort of breeze through things, we need to do jugaad, we need to hustle. But what we've learned the hard way sometimes is to ensure that you have a good performance management system right from the start. The first 3 years of the company, we just somehow winged it and sort of got by appraisal cycles. We didn't have a regular routine of monitoring progress, monitoring metrics, and hence there was sometimes a lack of discipline around how does one monitor progress and how does one monitor deviations. What we've done over the last 2 years is actually develop a fairly rigorous OKR structure, something that the likes of Google and Amazon also follow. We've set up regular routines in terms of how does the senior team interact and meet and monitor progress. And even though it could be just for 15 minutes in a week or in a fortnight, creating that discipline is something that has really helped us over the last 2 years. And I think one thing that we really didn't do well, which we are now working on, is training. Again, as a startup, you tend to focus on growth, you tend to focus on how do you scale as quickly as possible. We did not emphasize much on training, especially when we have, like I said, 600 odd people. And that has sometimes resulted in attrition levels. It has resulted in inconsistent customer service. And so what we are focusing on today is how do you put the right training, and not just through an HR department or through a people's department, but how do you institute training right through the org and actually make it a key achievable point of each and every manager's to-do goals. These are some of the things that I think we didn't do well. Obviously, there were a lot more, and for the sake of time, obviously won't go into too many of those. But I'll just spend maybe another 2 or 3 minutes talking about what we think forms the culture of the future. And these are some of the things, like I said, we did well and did wrong over the last 3-4 years. But as we think over the next sort of 4 to 5 years, we all know technology is changing, we all know companies are changing, customer experiences is changing. But there are 3 things that we are trying to think through to see how do we really define what is unique in terms of capital float culture. The first is what I would call tech and touch. Now, every lender, every digital lender is obviously trying to develop people-less processes, make it as efficient as possible, make the entire thing technology-driven, and we are doing that. But at the same time, we need to realize that we should not lose the touch with the customer. We should not lose touch with how they want to take a loan. We should be able to provide all options to them. So you can make everything paperless, and that is great, which we've done, but at the same time, some people need the follow-up service. They need the follow-up customer service. So for example, what we're trying to do is, based on certain input data, we are trying to see what is the most unique touch element that we can create for each customer experience. And some of the pilots that we've seen is that if a person applies for a loan through his mobile app, he actually prefers to speak to someone on the phone if he gets stuck in the process. Whereas someone who is actually filling out a loan application through a web app actually prefers an IVR. Somebody coming through a partner system like an Amazon or a Paytm or a Flipkart actually prefers to meet somebody to complete his loan app and actually help him through the documentation because they don't really interact with anyone through an Amazon or a Flipkart process. So depending upon the type of customer and the type of mode that they use for interacting with your company, what is the touch element that we can actually create? And I think that's critical for us because as we think through the next 3-4 years, everything will become so paperless and seamless that at the end of the day, you may forget who your customer is. The second thing that we are thinking through around culture is obviously around our people. And while most organizations over the years have thought about how do you build more cohesive teams, how do you create a great working culture, cross-functional teams, and everything designed in an organization is is fairly homogeneous around teams. Our focus for the next couple of years is trying to see how do we actually focus on the individual within the team. How do you bring out the individuality of a person? And so we all have standard communication templates when a person joins. It could be your offer letter, it could be your increment letter, it could be a bonus letter, which is standard across every employee in the organization. But we are starting to implement something that actually tells us how can we actually create something specific and customized for every individual within the company, whether it's written communication, whether it's in the form of meetings, town halls, one-to-one meetings. How do we really express and allow each individual to express themselves? Another example of this is, again, this is still at a pilot stage, but we check with people what their mood is on that particular day. And if somebody keeps clicking that he's not been in a good mood for the last few days, how do we tailor something unique in terms of communicating to him? Now, this is all sounds fluffy and is good from a feel-good factor, but how does it help in day-to-day work? And so for another unique example that we are working on right now is we have a lot of collection agents who obviously speak to customers and ensure the money comes back. That's a critical process in the lending, in the business, as you would know. But before a collection agent makes a call or a field visit, we just asked him 2 questions to see how his mood is that day. And depending on his mood, we actually assign cases to him or her, depending on his mood. So if he's in a lousy mood or he's had a bad day at home, we try to assign him an easier case. Or if he's in a good mood, we try to assign him a more difficult case. And we're starting to see interesting results on how actually assigning a case depending upon the mood of the collector actually helps increase the probability of collections. Again, this is an experiment, but this is something, if we are able to crack it, not only helps the feel-good factor in the company and makes each individual person feel important, but actually has amazing results when it comes to productivity of the organization. And the last thing before I sort of end for today, like I said, I won't keep it long, but something that's over the last 20 years, if you read any management book, every culture book has always said, how do we think of taking managers to leaders, and how do we get people to think of ownership? And no real organization has been actually be able to put out a model there. And as we think through creating owners within the company, this is the first time in the last few years, I would say, is creating ESOPs and employee stock options is actually common practice within startups today. So there is an economic incentive and a structure to have employees actually become owners within the company. The question now is, how do you design for this and how do you design for them becoming owners? And there are simple things in terms of obviously hierarchical designs that you can do, but the question is, how do you actually translate the economic incentive into a structural incentive to ensure that people actually become owners? So these are the 3 or 4 themes. Like I said, I won't take too long today, but my only last parting words would be is, do not worry about what you always read in a book around culture or what other companies are doing. Try to figure out what's unique within your own company. Try to figure out what is unique, what you're good at, and always try to sort of propel that forward. Realize the mistakes early on. Like I said, we made a bunch of mistakes. We are still in the process of correcting them. See if you can actually try to correct some of those mistakes early on. And do not forget hygiene things like training, like performance management. They typically sound like things that large companies should be doing, but there is tremendous value for a younger company as well in doing this. That said, I wish you all the best and thank you for giving me your time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I request Ms. Maria to please come on stage and present a memento to Mr. Gaurav Hinduja. So thank you so much for a very effective session. Can we all please give it up for Mr. Gaurav Hinduja, ladies and gentlemen? It's a small token of gratitude from our end. Please accept the same.